right. Good afternoon. I hope everyone here is doing well on this beautiful Sunday here at Emory University's Schwartz Performing Arts Center. I'm Jennifer King. I serve as the director of the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript, Archives, and Rare Book Library. On behalf of the Emory Libraries, I am delighted to welcome you all to this afternoon's Raymond Danowski Poetry Library reading with the incredible poet, Major Jackson. Each year, the Rose Library, with strengths in modern literature and poetry, African American history and culture, political, social, and cultural movements, Emory University history, oral histories, and rare books, organizes events that shine light on our collections. Today, we are celebrating the Raymond Danowski Poetry Library, acquired by Emory in 2004, consisting of 85,000 rare and first editions of modern and contemporary poetry, one of the largest and most significant collections of verse in the world. Raymond Danowski's daughter, Mary, is with us in the audience tonight. Mary, can you? Yay! In its 19th year, the Poetry Reading Series has hosted poets from America and abroad, including luminaries like Ada Limon, Joy Harjo, Nikki Giovanni, Lucille Clifton, Seamus Heaney, Natasha Trethewey, Tracy K. Smith, Richard Blanco, Marilyn Chin, and today we are so honored that Major Jackson joins this list of luminaries visiting with us in Atlanta. We are ever more fortunate that he also decided in 2022 to place his papers at Emory. For those of you who are not regular researchers in the archives, in addition to this afternoon's reading with Major Jackson, you are all most welcome to visit the Rose Library through our current exhibition at the Crossroads with Benny Andrews, Flannery O'Connor, and Alice Walker, which is on display in the Woodruff Library, 3rd floor through May 18th. And I really do want to emphasize that this is an exhibition not to miss. These 3 artists are from a 40-mile radius in Georgia. Their work coincided with the publication and responding to the publication of Everything That Rises Must Converge. And through their archives, we all have access to their thoughts, ideas, and responses to that story. And I encourage everyone to see it while that is on display. And further, if you happen to be an Alice Walker fan, and I know that probably all of us are, the manuscript of The Color Purple is on display along with the quilt that she made as she wrote her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. Before this afternoon's poetry reading, I want to and need to offer a few important acknowledgments, starting by acknowledging the Muskogee Creek people who lived, worked, produced knowledge on, nurtured the land where Oxford and the Atlanta campuses are now located. In 1821, 15 years before Emory's founding, the Muskogee were forced to relinquish this land. The library recognizes the sustained oppression, land dispossession, and involuntary removals of the Muskogee and Cherokee peoples from Georgia. I also want to thank my amazing colleagues, first and foremost, Joe Crispino and Caroline Herring, who served last night as our chief revelers for a dinner celebration that accompanies this public poetry reading. To my colleague, Heather Crystal, a poet and faculty member in the creative writing program at Emory University, who has ushered Major's entire visit, 3-day visit on the Emory campus. To the organizers, planners, curators, and archivists for all they have done, especially Jason Lowery, Aaron Glogowski, Gabby Hale, Ayana Bohannon, Holly Crenshaw, and Maureen McGavin. I thank the Schwartz Performing Arts Center team and Monique Sutherland for providing interpreter services this afternoon. I also must acknowledge the Creative Writing Program and the Hightower Fund, which made today's reading possible. A couple of logistics before the reading. Immediately following the program, Major Jackson will sign his latest book, Razzle Dazzle, which is also available for purchase with Emory's Barnes & Noble bookstore. The recording of this afternoon's reading will be made available shortly on the Emory YouTube channel, and I hope that you will share it with your family, friends. And furthermore, a special broadside designed to commemorate today's poetry reading will be available, and Major Jackson will be signing the broadside for you. So, time now for our program. To kick things off, I have the incredible privilege of introducing the writer and Emory faculty member, Tariq Jones, who has written 4 novels, Leaving Atlanta, The Untelling, Silver Sparrow, and An American Marriage. In The American Marriage, Tariq writes, "I don't believe that blood makes a family. Kin is the circle you create, hands held tight. I am delighted to be in this circle with hands held tight." Thank you, Tariq.
Good afternoon. It is my joy and my pleasure to introduce you to my friend, Major Jackson. I have known him for over 20 years as we debuted together on the very same day in 2002. His book, winner of the Cave Canem Prize, was called Leaving Saturn. Mine was called Leaving Atlanta. He is Major Jackson. I am Tariq Jones. So whenever lineups were organized alphabetically, we were shoulder to shoulder as we began our journeys as published writers. It has been more than a joy and a pleasure to watch him grow as a poet, professor, critic, truth teller, beauty builder, and passionate advocate for poetry and the arts. Let me start with Leaving Saturn, which contains the poem Blunts, which he knows is my absolute favorite. In this work, we meet the artist as a teenager in North Philadelphia, confessing to his friends that he wants to be a poet. I won't read this one to you because I hope he will read it to us. But I would like to note that he doesn't say that he likes poetry or that he wants to write poetry. He says he wants to be a poet. Robert Graves famously said, "To be a poet is a condition, not a profession." Wallace Stevens believed that the poet is the priest of the invisible. No great leaps are required to see Major Jackson reflected in these musings about the poet with a capital P. His 6 extraordinary volumes make clear his insight, wit, fearlessness, and capacious heart. He lives at the crossroads of history and possibility. Major is a son of Philly and a man of the world. His accolades are many: Whiting Award, Guggenheim Fellowship, Radcliffe Institute Fellowship, and he is the Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. So it is official. Major Jackson is a force in American letters and thoughts. But these plaudits merely confirm what we all learn when we encounter him on the page. The man is brilliant. But as John Freeman proclaimed in The New Yorker, no American poet wears his genius as lightly as Major Jackson. So this brings me to one of my favorite of Major's projects, his role as curator and host of the Slowdown podcast. Several days a week, he introduces the world to a new poem. He lets the verses speak for themselves, but his brief annotations demonstrate radiant observations without shifting the light from the work itself. It's Major's show, but it's not the Major show. The podcast has been recognized by numerous reviewers, but here's another sort of nod to the scope and power of this endeavor. A friend of mine who is not a poet, who is not a professor, a writer, or an artist. He is a Black man who gets up every day, drops his kids off at school, and goes to work. This old friend of mine is an aficionado of barbecue and old school R&B. He stumbled upon the Slowdown podcast and was hooked. For Christmas, he gave me a copy of Major's latest, Razzle Dazzle, with a note. It said, "T, you must read this." You see, Major gets it. He knows that poetry is for everyone. Or to quote the great Lucille Clifton, poetry is a matter of life, not just a matter of language. So enjoy this reading this afternoon, my friends, because this is a matter of life. In Major's own words, poetry divines the human enterprise. And after spending many quiet moments with his exquisite verses, I've revisited that statement of his. Poetry divines the human experience. And I was struck by the paradox of my experience between the pages of Major's mind. His poetry shows us the divinity in our merely human experience by exposing it for all of its complex humanity. Major does that. So in this moment, I am proud of my friend. I am proud to be his friend. And I am especially proud to introduce him to you on this beautiful afternoon at Emory University. So everyone, please won't you join me in welcoming to this stage, Mr. Major Jackson.
Good afternoon. You know, if you're shoulder to shoulder with Tariq Jones, the world is going to be great. It's just going to be wonderful. I am so deeply honored to be here at Emory. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, President Finvez, Vice Provost Dent, Jennifer Gunter King, all of her staff, my colleagues in the English department and throughout the university. Truly is a great honor to read before you. And students, what a great education you're getting here with such a wonderful resource as the library system here, particularly Rose, for which I'm honored that also that my work is here for reading, for research. By the way, I'm still writing. You should know that just because you'll hear some new poems and old poems. It's very interesting. This is a book called Razzle Dazzle, and it takes up 5 collections of poetry and new poems. And in trying to decide the order, do you start with your newest poems and dazzle them? Or do you start with your older poems and sound like a time machine? I'm going to read some of those time machine poems. This is titled How to Listen. I thought I would start us off. Poetry is so much about engaging our senses. Often, as we know, much of the sense of sight is engaged, but listening is truly important. This poem was written when I was probably 22, 23 years old. There was a gentleman who used to stand on a corner in downtown Philadelphia and just look up at the sky. He was near a very popular watering hole, we used to call it. And you would see him there. He had on a military jacket. And he seemed homeless, but definitely also suffered mental illness. But if you really listen to him, there was a lot of things that he was saying that made a lot of sense. How to listen. I'm going to cock my head tonight like a dog in front of McGlinchey's Tavern on Locust. I'm going to stand beside the man who works all day combing his thatch of gray hair, corkscrewed in every direction. I'm going to pay attention to our lives unraveling between the forks of his fine-toothed comb. For once, we won't talk about the end of the world or Vietnam or his exquisite paper shoes. For once, I am going to ignore the profanity and the dancing and the jukebox so I can hear his head crackle beneath the sky's stretch of faint stars. This is a poem called Indian Song, and it ends it's the last poem of my first book, Leaving Saturn. I wrote it while, believe it or not, getting a ticket after speeding in the great Texas and the great state of Kansas. And I have to admit, I was driving cross country. It was quite beautiful. And I was just in Kansas too long. I was just ready to get out of Kansas. And so I just started pressing my feet down. And rightly so, a state trooper pulled me over, and I started this poem called Indian Song, which is named after a Wayne Shorter composition. I think I was listening. In fact, I know as I was listening to Wayne Shorter, who was playing with Freddie Hubbard. You should know that there is something referenced in here, ancient technology called a cassette deck. It was, cassettes are plastic, rectangular, if you're trying to conjure an image. Yeah. Freddie Hubbard's playing the cassette deck, 40 miles outside Hayes. And I've looked at this Kansas sunset for 3 hours now, bristling as big rigs bounce and grumble along I-70. At this speed, cornfields come in splotches, murky yellows and greens abutting the road shoulder, the flat wealth of the nation whirring by. It's a kind of ornamentation I've gotten used to, as in a dream, espaliered against the sky's blazing cloud luffs cascade lace-like, darkening whole fields. 30,000 feet above, someone is buttering a muffin. Someone stares at a sky phone, and momentarily a baby cries in pressurized air. Through double-paned squares, someone squints, fields cross-hatched by asphalt strips. It is said Cézanne looked at a landscape so long he felt as if his eyes were bleeding. No matter that, I'm heading west. It's all so redolent, this wailing music. By my side, you fingering fields of light, sunflowers over earth, miles traveled, a patchwork of goodbyes. A newer poem, in November 2020, I moved to Nashville, which is an ancestral home in a lot of ways. I spent 10 years of my childhood there. It was very different when I was growing up. It felt more rural in memory. And if you go there now and you stand on a corner downtown Nashville and do a 360, you can count about 5 or 6 cranes within your sight. We also have a lot of pedal taverns, people who want to celebrate an upcoming marriage. And as you know, it's Music City. So this is called Nashville Sonnet Deconstructed on a Bed of Magnolia Blossoms. In this city, no one talks dialectical materialism. From high up, the cranes speak an invisible language. The trusses extend over pedal taverns and tractors, joyriding flat beds of dancing tourists, and it is like reading God's lips. On guard, she says. Today, I am landscaping, staking light across my wintergreen yard to get the worm's perspective, to beg his forgiveness. I'm reaching fingers into darkest soil, pondering the afterlife. A house wren flouts its surefire code to all this achy, breaky singing. Such intricate phrasing like a compass behind Giacomo de Latini's feathered quill pen. I live in a city of acoustic martyrs addicted to heartbreak. Plus this, even the magnolias, vulnerable each spring, court a delicious despair and gift their cream-colored blossoms like spark plugs for the living. Magnolias down here are really different than they are in Vermont. I mean, the blossoms are they're bigger than your heads. It's amazing. My wife, a Floridian, came up, we were courting, and she came up to Vermont, and she said, "What tree is that?" And I said, "It's a magnolia tree." She goes, "Puny." Speaking of my wife, some of you know she's a poet, which makes January 14th, February 14th, quite challenging in my household, because you can't show up with a Hallmark card. You have to have written a poem. This is one of them. It's for the craft people, it's an extended conceit. Lovesick. First, you will need to cross some dark threshold. I suggest lying on your back in a pasture of cut ryegrass or in a city park. I suggest planting an arm behind your head. You have inherited acres of a night sky, and she is your aurora borealis. And though you cannot see the world's wild shadows, here she will be, nacreous, grace wavering in bands of blue-green light, ribbons of gold neon beneath skin. You will want to write a long letter to your dead. You will encounter her mind as a kind of iridescent song, heroic and dense. You will feel fetched as though from some polluted river. Her glances will pass over you like folklore. Do not be afraid. This is wonder mirroring itself and breaking across your face. Endless treetops in silhouette, knowing looks of your elders. If you are a poet, you know there's a job description that comes with that. One of them is probably at the top of the list of the job description is that you must write a sonnet. And the other form you must write is an ode. And in putting together this book, I realized I had never written explicit ode, and I couldn't decide on a single object, ode to socks, ode to cats. I couldn't decide, so I decided to write ode to everything, and that takes care of that. Somehow, I have never thought to thank the ice cream cone for building a paradise in my mouth. And can you believe I have never thought to thank the purple trout lily for demonstrating its six-petaled dive, or the yellow circle in a traffic light for illustrating patience. My bad. In my life, I have failed to praise the postman, whose loyalty is epic. The laundress, who treasures my skinny jeans and other garments, and the auto repairman, who clings a wrench inside my car, tightening her own music. Were my name called, and I were summoned on a brightly lit stage to accept a little statuette, after staring in utter disbelief, I would thank my dentist, as well as my neighbor who sits vigil beside the dying, far away from the lights. And my fourth grade teacher, who brought down 3 tape rulers on my hands as punishment for daydreaming out a window during an exam I already completed. Mea culpa. Now that I know the value of the peaks across from Flanders Hill, I will forever express reverence for their green crowns. I will never fail again to say small devotions for the scar on a friend's face that lengthens when I walk into a room. It marvels me that, teachers back in the day, they got away with a lot of stuff. Whew. Sister Nancy, I'll never forget it. Daydreaming. We get punished for daydreaming. That is going to be the epitaph on my. He was punished for daydreaming. So he wrote poems. He became a poet. Thank you for your patience here. This is called Think of Me Laughing. It's after Gerald Stern, whose last line I realized echoed one of his poems. This was written after the tragedies of 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Think of me laughing. You're right to imagine me sobbing on the corner of 6th Avenue and West 4th, or raising a hashtag cardboard above my head near the Liberty Bell. You're right to picture me lying down below the gold dome Capitol demanding, don't shoot. It is my annual day of sobbing. What are these brown hands for if not to bury my eyes in the ancient rivers of wrong? And isn't this my consigned single note in our final piece of music, mindless as a blink? So go ahead. You and I are once again rehearsing decency. It is the dream of loving fruited plains that do not love you back. It is our feet planted in concrete that has me weep. But first, give thought to my luxuries. The sunset I toasted over the Val di Schiana with an aperitivo in Cafe Poliziano the summer of 15. Or give thought to the promontories of conversation with my father yesterday, in which, among other delights, we discussed the dignity of eggplants, whose purplish tint reminded him of a great aunt. Consider my love of celestial bodies. You're better off thinking of me singing this morning, a little Marvin Gaye, not what's going on, but I want you. Sultry and soulful, a one-way love is just a fantasy. Oh, sugar, forgive me for being bound up in the ecstatic right now. I do not regret my little bout with life. It must be the supermarket in me. I'm addicted to conceits, long conceits. I read a lot of poets who used this as a strategy. The conceit is in the title. It must be the supermarket in me. And the first line is the title of the poem. It must be the supermarket in me, all lit from inside, full of wide aisles and thoughtful shelf stocking, where you'll find my feelings and memories. That's why on the outside, I look so ordered and put together. My inner supermarket contains an old world butcher shop with no trace of the slaughter. Shoppers arrive with an unfathomable hunger, which I relieve by offering freshness, quality, and value. Some are penniless and can only fantasize, licking their lips at rows of artisanal cheeses and meats behind glass display cases. The cloth-bound cheddars and goat at ropes of cured salami and prosciutto. Still, they taste. I offer free samples at stations throughout my supermarket so people will come to know and like me. In the produce department, many test my pears and avocados for ripeness. In the floral area, they sniff. Some walk off with my bouquets. I contain cheerful baggers who will help you to your car. At times, truthfully, I dislike this about myself, forever accommodating. I've not always had a supermarket in me. It began when the church in me lost its congregation and when I lost my mother's love to cocktails and other stimulants. There is no place for anger in my supermarket. I keep it in the back room with a sign that says, "No trespassing, employees only." It's a way of being in the world, a self, full of checkout lines and refrigerators, until someone runs through me, knocking down my pyramids of canned goods or panic shopping, leaving empty aisles. Story about that poem. During courtship, my wife, a Floridian, I'm going to keep saying that, my wife, the Floridian, she came up to Vermont where I lived and had a air of superiority about her when she walked to my local grocery store. And she talked about this place, Publix, as if it were a cult. Well lit, big aisles, everything fresh, clean, all of that. And then I went to Orlando and joined. I just added this poem, Why I Write Poetry. I tell the story of, I traveled for 15 years, one day a week, from Vermont to New York, often the first flight to teach in NYU, New York University's creative writing program. And I took the last plane back. It was a very rigorous commute. Often the first flight meant I got little sleep. So I would often talk to my neighbor who I didn't want to talk to. And if I didn't want to talk to my neighbor, if I wanted to talk to my neighbor, it's like, what do you do? What are you going down to New Year's Eve? Oh, I teach. What do you teach? English, blah, blah, blah. What's your area? On and on and on. What do you do? But if I want to go to sleep to the question of what do you do, I say I'm a poet. And then that shuts down all conversation. I can start creating a pillow of my jacket, and that's that. But then a gentleman was persistent. Just as I was about to doze, he said, "Why?" And I was like, startled. I had no answer. Maybe it was the time of day, but I was speechless. And then I went to my office at NYU and started this poem, Why I Write Poetry. Because my son is as old as the stars. Because I have no blessings. Because I hold tangerines like orange tennis balls. Because I sit alone and welcome morning across the unshaped jaws of my lawn. because the houses on my street sleep like turtles, because the proper weight of beauty was her eyes last night beneath my eyes, because the red goblet from which I drank made even water a Faustian toast, because radishes should be banned, little pellets that they are, because someone says it's late and begins to rise from a chair, because a single drop of rain is hope for the thirsty, because life is ordinary unless you plan and set in motion a war, because I have not thanked enough, because my lips moisten whenever I hear Mingus's goodbye pork pie hat, because I plant winter vegetables in July, because I could say the morning died like candle wax and no one would question its truth. Because I relish being sent into the coat room in third grade, where alone I would turn off the light and run my hands over my classmates' coats as if playing tag with their bodies. Because once I shoplifted a pair of Hawaiian shorts and was caught at the Gallery Mall. Because soup reminds me of the warmth of my grandmother and old aunts, because the long coast of my dreams is filled with saxophones and poems. Because somewhere, someone is buying a Rolex or a Piaget. Because I wish I could speak 3 different languages, but have to settle for the language of business and commerce. Because I used to wear paisley shirts and herringbone sports jackets, because I better get it in my soul. Because my grandfather loved clean syntax, cologne, Stacey Adams shoes, Irish tweed caps, and women, but not necessarily in that order. Because I think the elderly are sexy and the young are naive and brutish. Because a vision of trees only comes to wise women and men who can fix old watches. Because I write with a pen whose supply of ink comes from the sea. Because gardens are fun to visit in the evenings when everyone has put away their coats and swords. Because I still do not eat corporate French fries or rhubarb jam. Because punctuation is my jury and the moon is my judge. Because my best friend in 4th grade chased city buses from corner to corner. His father could not stop looking up at the sky after his return from the war. Because parataxis is just another way of making ends meet. Because I've been on a steady diet of words since the age of 3. Can I pause for a second and thank our sign interpreter for the great work he's doing? Wonderful. This is called Making Things. It's an early poem. The early poems in Razzle Dazzle emerged out of a feeling like, okay, here's the Hinge book, what's next? And in revisiting old poems, there is a great shudder of embarrassment because of you're growing into the art, you are apprenticing yourself, you're also younger and so more prone to emotional bursts of feeling, unfettered, and you lay that on your friends and you beg them for your delayed gratitude. Then you write something and you go, okay, this is going in, this will be around. But the other thing that happened to me was I was able to kind of measure my life to this moment against the poems, the life off the page against the poems that were written. And all of the great joy is there, the joy of being a father, the joy of being in love, the joy of experiencing, traveling the world, but also life's punches were there too. And all of it is contained in art in this interesting ways that kind of refract and tell its own particular story. So there's a great deal of renewal, a great deal of belief in a practice that allows me to have a lens on all of it, from the micro to the macro, from the personal to the political, from the community to the nationhood. It's all there. This is titled Making Things. Suddenly, I had to skewer all my prayers and slow roast them in the open air kitchen of my imagination. I had to shovel fire into my laughter and keep my eyes from blinking. I had to fuss like a cook simmering storms. I had to move like a ballet dancer, but without the vanity and self-consciousness of tradition. I had to blur my scars so I could write into time and carry the sensation of walking like a morose and heavy American sporting a yellow ascot over Pont Saint Michel. I want to be all razzle dazzle before the dark cloak one arrives for a last game of chess. My font of feelings is a waterfall, and I live as if no toupees exist on earth, or masks that silence the oppressed, or anything that does not applaud the sycamore's tribute to the red flame, like the heat beneath my grandmother's heart, who never raised a ghost, but a storm. So look at me, standing on the porch, laughing at the creek, threatening to become a raging river. So I have these thoughts when I'm reading that are parallel, sometimes adjacent from what I'm reading. And I just saw, one of my thoughts was, there's one letter that separates heat from heart. That is so cool. Language of the moon. As a child, I'm dedicating this to Heather Crystal. Language of the moon. As a child, I wanted as many letters in my bloodstream as the planet Mercury would allow. And so traveled the city on buses late afternoons and read all the billboards high above the streets and byways on the sides of factories and churches, and never heard the sermons of the displaced or blustery talk of founding fathers. And saddened when a root snaked through long tunnels, then eased when reemerged out of the murder of light. I could feel my veins thicken like the winnings of a Powerball. And the mystery of women lounging around a gray-bearded man in a silk smoking jacket, drinking a tumbler of cognac, was like the easeful glide of a narcotic dream. My mouth puckered whenever lemon-colored arches appeared 5 stories above the city like golden gates to an unforeseen heaven. As a rule, I never glanced at other commuters or curators in lucent ties and tuxedos who clutched brown papered bottles and nodded to a stillness as though murdered in a film. Instead, I glimpsed myself looking out a window, awed by Cartier timepieces and luxury cars that asked, was I hungry for speed? Or ordered me to let my body drive. I ate advertisements like sea waves eating a coastline. And though my sense of self was as bruised as a moldy peach, I learned to infrared my longings from the inside and to tally my suspicions from a distance. And now, when I read a newspaper, I flutter like a sparrow at a bird feeder. And when language spills out of my skull like a massive cruise ship docked and towering over a line of ramshackle huts on an island whose blessed poor gaze up as though a locker of dollars fell at their feet, my brain closes and my veins burst as if pollinating the white face of the moon. A good deal of my poems from my youth were written to capture moments of my youth. And this is a moment of with some friends, not exactly as it's narrated. I strongly believe poets should also, like fiction writers, make things up. But the essence of the poem is there, and I want to dedicate this to my friend Tariq Jones because it is a seminal poem for me. It's called Blunts. And I should say, when I was a kid, man, if you engaged in this activity, you could be thrown in jail. It freaks me out to walk down New York City or San Francisco and just the waft of green stuff is just everywhere. I mean, you could get some years, man. So I'm suffering trauma right now when I'm triggered. I look around like, yeah, police are coming. Y'all better be careful. Blunts. The first time I got high, I stood in a circle of boys at 23rd and Ridge, tucked inside a doorway that smelled of urine. It was March. The cold rains all but blurred our sight as we feigned sophistication, passing a bullet-shaped bottle of malt. Johnny Cash had a love for transcendental numbers and explained between puffs resembling little gasps of air, the link to all creation was the mathematician. Malik, the smartest of the crew, counter-argued and cited the holy life of prayer as a gateway to the Islamic faith that was for all intents the true path for the righteous black man. No one disputed. Malik cocked his head, pinched the joint, and pulled so hard we imagined his lips crazy glued into stiff O's. It was long agreed that Lefty would inherit his father's used car business, thus destined for a life of wrecks. Then, amid a fit of coughing, I broke the silence. I want to be a poet. It was nearing dinner time. Jesus lived here. His sister was yelling at their siblings over the evening news and game shows. The stench of hot dogs and sauerkraut drifted down the dank hallway. A pre-spring wind flapped the plastic covering of a junkman shopping cart. As Eddie Hardrick licked left to right the thin strip of glue at the edge of a rolling paper, then uttered, "So, you want the tongue of God." I bent double in the blade of smoke and looked up for help. It was too late. We were tragically hip. So my adjacent thought, parallel thought while I was reading that one was, my Philly accent is coming out for some reason. I said dog. And earlier I heard myself say caught. Apologies. Or if you're from that region, Philadelphia, New York, that area, welcome home. My voice is bringing home to you. I'm doing good. I think so. Mr. Pate's Barbershop. I remember the room in which he held a blade to my neck and scraped the dark hairs foresting a jawline. Stacks of ebonies and jets. clippers of black boxers, Joe Frazier, Jimmy Young, Jack Johnson. The color television bolted to a ceiling like the one I watched all night at St. Joseph's while my cousin recovered from gunshots. I remember the old Coke machine, a water fountain by the door, how I drank the summer of '88 over and over from a paper cone cup and still cannot quench my thirst. For this was the year funeral homes boomed, the year Mr. Pate swept his own shop. For he had lost his best little helper to crossfire. He suffered like most barbers suffered, quietly, his clippers humming so loud. He forgot Ali's lightning left jab, his love for angles, for carpentry, for baseball. He forgot everything and would never be the same. I remember the way the blade gleamed fierce in the fading light of dusk and the reflection of myself panned inside the razor's edge, wondering if I could lay down my pen, close up my journals, my ledgers, if I could undo my tie and take up barbering, where months on end a child's head would darken at my feet and bring with it the uncertainty of tomorrow. Or like Mr. Pate, gathering clumps of fallen hair at the end of a day in short, delicate whisks, as though they were the fine findings of gold dust he'd deposit in a jar and place on a shelf, only to return Saturdays, collecting as an antique dealer collects, growing tired, but never forgetting someone has to cherish these tiny little heads. Coming around the mountain. Last three poems. It's called On Disappearing. And I'd like to read this poem because I think it began the journey of what I was saying, that kind of recommitment to poetry, and also getting at what my friend Tayari reminded me, something I said about divining, how art, our works remain even as we may depart, and something about the record of a mind, the record of an imagination, the work of creativity existing in the world, hopefully illuminating so much of what it means to be human. On disappearing. I have not disappeared. The boulevard is full of my steps. The sky is full of my thinking. An archbishop prays for my soul, even though we met only once, and even then he was busy waving at a congregation. The ticking clocks in Vermont sway back and forth, as if sweeping up my eyes and my tattoos and my metaphors, and what comes up are the great paragraphs of dust, which also carry motes of my existence. I have not disappeared. My wife quivers inside a kiss. My pulse was given to her many times in many countries. The chunks of bread we dip in olive oil is communion with our ancestors who also have not disappeared. Their delicate songs I wear on my eyelids. Their smiles have given me freedom, which is a crater I keep falling in when I bite into the two halves of an orange whose cross-section resembles my lungs. A delta of juices bursts down my chin and like magic makes me appear to those who think I've disappeared. It's too bad war makes people disappear like chess pieces. and that prisons turn prisoners into movie endings. When I fade into the mountains on a forest trail, I still have not disappeared, even though its green facade turns my arms and legs into branches of oak. It is then I belong to a southerly wind, which by now you have mistaken as me nodding back and forth like a Hasid in prayer, or a mother who's just lost her son to gunfire in Detroit. I have not disappeared. In my children, I see my bulging face pressing further into the mysteries in a library in Tucson, on a plain above Buenos Aires, on a field where nearby burns a controlled fire. I am held by a professor, a general, and a photographer. One burns a finely wrapped cigar, then sniffs the scented pages of my books. Scouring for the bitter smell of control, I hold him in my mind like a chalice. I have not disappeared. I swish the amber hue of lager on my tongue and ponder the drilling rigs in the Gulf of Alaska and all the oil-painted plovers. When we talk about limits, we disappear. In Jasper, Texas, you can disappear on a strip of gravel. I am a life in sacred language. Termites toil over a grave, and my mind is a ravine of yesterdays. At a glance from across the room, I wear September on my face, which is eternal and does not disappear, even if you close your eyes once and for all simultaneously, like two coffins. This is a poem titled You Reader. And I was just talking to Sky. Sky is a reporter for Scholastic Arts, and Sky was asking me questions about being a poet. And I was talking about the great Etheridge Knight and his formulation about the poem, the poet, the poem, and the people that makes this triangle in which a poem is not completed until it enters the community, enters the world, is read and absorbed. How poems mediate our existence, our differences, our commonalities, what we share and what we don't share, and yet we have to face what it means to be separate and at one. You Reader has that same sentiment beneath it. So you're the lighthouse, by the way. I'll give away the metaphor. You're the lighthouse. So often I dream of the secrets of satellites. And so often I want the moose to step from the shadows and reveal his transgression. So often I come to her body as though she were Lookout Mountain, but give me a farmer's market to park my martyred mass, and I will name all the dirt roads that dead end at the Cubist sculpture called My Infinity. For I no longer light bonfires in the city of adulterers and no longer smudge the cheeks of debutantes hurriedly floating across the high fruit of night. And yes, I know there is only one notable death in any small town, and that is the pig farmer. But listen, at all times, the proud rivers mourn my absence, especially when, like a full moon, you, reader, hidden behind a spray of night blooming, drift in and out of scattered clouds above lighthouses, producing their artificial calm, just to sweep a chalk of light over distant waters. And finally, thank you for your hosting me here. This is my last poem. And I want to thank again my colleagues here at Emory and Jennifer, Aaron, all the good people in the Rose Library. This is titled Double Major. Last night I read its complimentary poem called Major and I. And the conceit of this poem is that the inner major is talking about the outer major. Plus I get the good pun of punning on my name, Major. So you get double major. I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings and ordered Athenaeums. I own his face, but he washes and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other selves are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless, yet large. They stare his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry, and thus I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls our thirst for pencils and pads destiny. Our voices come together like two wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability, the test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed. To bed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Major Jackson. Tayari said that you wear your intellect lightly, and it is really true. And what else is really true is that you razzle dazzle. Listening to him today makes me glad to be human and glad that he is a poet and glad that he is with us at Emory. I also want to thank Tariq Jones for her beautiful introduction, Monique for her fantastic translation, Sky. Thank you for your incredible journalism. We are honored that you are here from Scholastic News, so I can't wait to see your article. I also thank Lisa Macklin, Associate Vice Provost of the Libraries and University Librarian, for supporting today's program. Thank you so much, Lisa. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon. It's been a really special time together, so thank you so much.